The air in the courtroom was thick, as if every breath carried weight. Journalists, stiff-backed and wide-eyed, clutched their pens like lifelines. Every sound felt amplified: the rustle of papers, the tap of a shoe. Then came the sound everyone had been waiting for, a slow creak. The doors swung open. Silence rippled across the room like a shockwave. And into that silence walked a man who wasn't a celebrity, wasn't a lawyer, wasn't a headline chaser, but who held the truth the entire country had been aching to hear. Special Agent Monroe, the man who led the federal raid on Diddy Combs' estate. He didn't have the flair of a showman. His steps were measured, eyes calm, voice steady. But as he made his way to the stand, the mood shifted. This wasn't gossip anymore. This wasn't theory. This was federal testimony. And the entire courtroom knew whatever he said next would change everything after being sworn in. Monroe sat, squared his shoulders, and looked to the judge. The prosecutor stood slowly, her tone composed but trembling with anticipation. "Agent Monroe," she began, "please tell the court what you discovered inside the hidden vault beneath Mr. Combs' Beverly Hills property." For a few heartbeats, Monroe said nothing. Just silence. Crushing, breathless silence. Then, finally, his voice broke through quiet. Deliberate, chilling. "There was a concealed chamber behind a false wall on the lower level of the home," he began. "You couldn't access it without biometric verification. Not even the household staff knew it was there." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Diddy's legal team shifted in their seats. Across the aisle, Diddy sat motionless, his hands clenched tight in his lap, jaw locked so tight it looked carved in stone. "The room was designed for secrecy," Monroe continued. "It wasn't some luxury bunker or high-end security feature. This was intentional concealment. Inside, we found a classified archive, both physical and digital." He paused again. You could hear someone in the gallery whisper, "Jesus," encrypted. Drives, labeled binders. Segmented folders with initials, dates, locations. But what stood out most wasn't the volume, it was the organization. This wasn't chaotic, it was clinical. The prosecutor stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "What kind of organization?" Monroe drew a breath. There was a dedicated section labeled Assets. Within it, we found files some more than 2 decades old containing photos, contracts, emails, handwritten notes. These weren't just business documents. They were leverage, blackmail, recorded phone calls, secret video clips. In some cases, documented confessions. The courtroom recoiled. The atmosphere changed instantly. People didn't know whether to gasp or cry. The walls felt smaller now. The silence wasn't just heavy, it was suffocating. And there was more. Monroe continued, his voice hardening. "We found a logbook, not digital handwritten. It named individuals, both public figures and insiders. Beside each name were notes, paid, compliant, still useful. Hold for timing." Someone audibly choked in the gallery. The judge raised his gavel, hesitated, then slowly set it down. He knew this wasn't a courtroom moment. This was history unraveling itself in real time. And then, Monroe said, lowering his voice, "We found a room within the vault. A separate entry, locked behind a second layer of security. Inside that chamber was a steel safe." He paused. "We've only started analyzing what was inside it," he said grimly. "But one thing is absolutely clear. This vault wasn't a place of safety. It was a place of control." The words dropped like a thunderclap. Shock turned into paralysis. The audience didn't stir. The jurors stared blankly ahead. Even reporters, used to chaos and scandal, sat utterly frozen, their pens trembling above the page. But Agent Monroe wasn't finished. There was a digital folder flagged by our forensic Team, he said, voice flat now. Its title, pending insurance level red. The prosecutor blinked. Level red. Monroe nodded. According to FBI code classification, that's material of maximum sensitivity, evidence that poses serious threat to life, national relevance, or criminal coercion on a high scale. Gasps erupted once again. A woman covered her mouth. Man cursed under his breath. Inside the folder, Monroe continued. We found wire transfers routed through anonymous offshore accounts, secret audio, forged documentation, dozens of video files, all strategically organized not to protect the owner, but to destroy others, if needed. He met the prosecutor's gaze and added, "This wasn't precaution, it was preparation." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. One of the videos, he said, captured a conversation between a prominent industry executive and an unknown associate. It appears to be at a private retreat. There's drinking, joking, then suddenly turns dark. The executive confesses to covering up a scandal. The most disturbing part. The camera used to film this was traced back to surveillance tech we found installed in one of Mr. Combs' guest houses. Whispers broke out again, quieter this time, no longer fueled by curiosity, but fear. These people, Monroe said, had no idea they were being recorded. He allowed the moment to settle. And each of these recordings, he added, was indexed by metadata. Career arcs, contract cycles, public behavior. It wasn't surveillance, it was a long game. Every file was a trap, every name a pawn. Diddy's eyes were glued to the table. His attorney was writing so quickly, the pen scratched audibly across. The pad dot and still. Monroe wasn't done. There were also cash bundles unmarked, bearer bonds, passports under aliases, stamped, used. The judge leaned back. The jury looked shaken, some blinking too fast, others sitting stock still. And then it came. We found a list, Monroe said plainly, printed, bound, pages long. It categorized individuals under titles like owned, owed, watch, target. There were notes beside the names, dates, observations. We're still working to decode some of them. The prosecutor blinked. Are you saying Mr. Combs kept a master index of people he controlled? Monroe didn't even flinch. Yes, he called it the Vault Index. And just like that, the courtroom burst. Not with noise, but with the kind of psychic rupture that only comes when the truth is too monstrous to deny. The judge struck his gavel. Order, but the damage was done. This wasn't tabloid drama. This wasn't speculation. This was a documented system of silence, manipulation, and intimidation designed, maintained, and hidden in plain sight. And that was just the beginning. A system of surveillance and salience. No one in the room moved. Not the judge, not the jury, not even the reporters. Every single person was pinned in place, as if the gravity of Agent Monroe's words had paralyzed the air itself. And then, with quiet certainty, Monroe adjusted his microphone and said something that pulled the entire courtroom into even deeper unease. There's one more folder the digital team flagged. It began. It was titled in red, Insurance Level Red. The prosecutor looked up from her notes, visibly shaken. We've heard that classification already. What was different about this folder? Monroe didn't blink. This one wasn't about leverage, it was about annihilation. He continued, calm but relentless. Dozens of videos, some clearly filmed without consent. Wire transfers routed through crypto wallets. Audio tapes enhanced for clarity. Forged legal documents tailored to destroy reputations, frame people, or push them out of the spotlight entirely. The temperature dropped again. One of the jurors, an older man in a brown blazer, slowly removed his glasses, rubbing his face. As if trying to wipe away the horror, Monroe cleared his throat, then said plainly, "What we found was extortion preloaded, prepackaged, ready to deploy." The prosecutor leaned in. "Can you give the court an example?" "Yes," Monroe said, flipping to a page in his file. "There's a video clip featuring a major executive, someone still active in the entertainment industry. The executive is seen admitting to illegal contract tampering and verbal abuse of subordinates. It appears casual, off the record, but the disturbing part is the device that recorded it." He looked to the jury. It was linked to a covert camera hidden in one of Diddy's own guest suites. Another gasp. This one felt more collective, as though the room itself had been struck. "They never knew they were being watched," Monroe said. The prosecutor looked pale. "And the files, were they just stored or cataloged?" "They were logged," Monroe said. "By name, by career path, by usefulness. Some had notes like, 'Useful until next album,' or 'Threat-level high-hold footage.' In one case, a rising artist tried to renegotiate a contract. A call meeting turned quiet till Diddy allegedly said, 'You want freedom.' Got a Vegas tape. Try again, gasps. Again, but smaller, more afraid. And the artist backed down," Monroe concluded. "Completely." The prosecutor paused. "Agent Monroe, ... Were any minors involved?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was deliberate, almost careful. "We're still investigating," he said. "Several files are encrypted. But what we've uncovered so far, it suggests long-term patterns of coercion. Contracts rewritten under duress. Collaborations canceled without explanation. Some careers dismantled by whispers." From the gallery, a quiet sob broke through. One of the journalists wiped her face with trembling hands. Even seasoned legal analysts sat frozen, their pens abandoned, mouths slightly open. Then Monroe reached into his folder again and produced something small, fragile. A USB drive, scorched on one side. "This," he said, "was discovered hidden behind a false panel in the vault's main chamber. Someone tried to destroy it. We managed to salvage 2 video files." He set the drive on the evidence table like it was a loaded weapon. "One file is under seal due to extreme content," he added. "The second is a private meeting, 2 high-level executives talking about who to push forward, who to silence." Mr. Combs' voice is heard off-camera saying, "Don't worry, I've got tapes. On all of them. They move when I say move." This time, the courtroom didn't react. Not outwardly. There were no gasps left, no outrage, just a silent collective sense of nausea-like, watching the final seconds of an empire collapse in slow motion. "The reason many never speak," Monroe said, "isn't fear of losing fame, it's fear of exposure. This vault didn't just contain secrets, it contained careers, reputations, blackmail tools. And it all points back ... to Mr. Combs. Diddy didn't flinch, but his silence said more than words ever could." "There's more," Monroe added, voice dropping again. "Along with physical cash and confidential documents, we found briefing books, leather-bound, dozens of them." The prosecutor looked puzzled. "Briefing books?" Monroe nodded. "Detailed psychological profiles, not for business partners. For people, artists, influencers, managers, athletes." He opened one as the courtroom watched. These documents listed mental health histories, past addictions, affairs, legal liabilities, debts. Some included private therapy notes and confidential medical data. A wave of horror surged through the room. "These weren't public files," Monroe clarified. "This information had to be obtained illegally." The prosecutor looked rattled. "And the purpose of these ... profiles?" "To dismantle," Monroe said bluntly. Not defend, not protect, but to dismantle. Then he glanced toward Diddy's table. And yes, we found evidence that some of these profiles were used. In one instance, Diddy's assistant was directed to remind a former partner that certain footage would be ... unfortunate. During a negotiation, the jurors couldn't hide their disgust. One young woman covered her mouth. Another man shook his head slowly, eyes full of disbelief. And yet, Monroe wasn't done. We also discovered a program, he said. A recruitment system. The prosecutor's brow furrowed. Mostly dancers and aspiring rappers. They were invited. 2 exclusive parties. Phones confiscated. Private meetings. Promises made. ... Then silence. His voice faltered just slightly. We don't know how many are okay, he said. Some vanished from the industry, fueled by fear, masked as mentorship. Diddy still hadn't moved, still hadn't blinked. But the illusion of composure was crumbling one breath at a time. Monroe closed one of the briefing books. He looked at the judge. We've only begun to understand the scale of this operation, he said. But one thing is clear. This wasn't about protecting an image. He looked around the room. It was about controlling an industry. The archive room and the Sub-Zero BR by now. The courtroom no longer felt like a place of LUT, felt like a burial ground for illusion. The kind of space where reputations didn't just die, they were dissected. And yet, Agent Monroe wasn't finished. He looked around, his voice growing colder, quieter, as if what he was about to say needed to be whispered to be believed. There's a section of the vault, he said, that we weren't even supposed to find. The room stirred again. It's not on any blueprint, not visible on any design plan. We only uncovered it after noticing discrepancies in the structure's wiring and floor schematics. He reached for a file, tapping a photograph. We used ground-penetrating radar. That's when we detected a concealed stairwell hidden behind reinforced concrete. The judge leaned forward. Several jurors exchanged glances. We called it Sub-Zero, Monroe continued. That was a label stamped onto a steel panel near the base of the stairwell. The door to this chamber was disguise-made to look like part of the studio's acoustic wall. His tone shifted, heavier now. This room was something else, entirely. He let the words settle before continuing. It wasn't for files or money. It was for strategy. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. What kind of strategy? Monroe took a breath. There were mannequins, life-size, dressed in exact replicas of real artists' outfits. Beside them, floor plans, blueprints of homes, rehearsal studios, even green rooms at award shows. Every inch mapped out. He flipped to another photo. There were printed scripts, dialogues, rehearsed conversations, notes on body language, emotional triggers, behavioral patterns. Murmurs broke out across the room. The prosecutor blinked. You're saying this was a training facility? Monroe nodded slowly. It looked like psychological conditioning. Targeted rehearsals, not to connect with people, but to break them, manipulate them. A quiet "Dear God" echoed from the gallery. And that wasn't the worst of it, he continued. There was a projector system, constantly looping past interviews, performances, encounters. Each clip annotated with phrases like leverage point, emotional crack, or exploit Q. One juror gripped the armrest so hard their knuckles turned white. It was a dissection lab for human behavior, Monroe said. They weren't looking at people as collaborators. They were looking at them as programmable assets. Silence thickened again, this time with dread. Monroe looked down, flipped a page, and said quietly, "Then we saw the wall." The wall? Covered in black and white photographs. Dozens, some scratched out, some circled in red. And under each face, a date. The prosecutor asked the question everyone was thinking. What do the dates signify? In some cases, Monroe answered, They aligned with personal disasters, overdoses, canceled. Tours, unexplained public breakdowns, or sudden removals from major projects. In others, ... We don't know yet, but the pattern is undeniable. The judge inhaled sharply, clearly disturbed. "There's one file I want to draw attention to," Monroe said next. It was titled Phase 4, Collapse Protocol. It outlined a precise plan if Mr. Combs were ever investigated, arrested, or killed. Gasps. A couple of people actually leaned back in their seats in disbelief. These weren't ramblings, Monroe clarified. They were written like corporate battle plans, bullet-pointed, color-coded, specific names, specific triggers. The prosecutor pressed in. What were the triggers? Media narratives to deploy, allies to activate, fallback leaks to release, if necessary. He held up a page, even instructions on how to flip critics into supporters, who to pay, what platforms to avoid, which journalists were compliant. The air in the courtroom was no longer heavy, was hostile, as if the truth itself had become a living, breathing force. Monroe kept going. Another folder, labeled Legacy Re-edit, included records of payments through shell companies to PR firms and influencers. It even ranked which platforms had favorable lien and which were marked avoid unless bought out. The prosecutors swallowed hard. "Are you saying this was media manipulation?" "I'm saying," Monroe replied, "it was total narrative control." The room was silent again. The kind of silence that made people question everything they'd ever believed about fame, power, and the machinery behind it. And then, he added, "We found the envelope." Every head turned. It was sealed. Handwritten on the front, "For my eyes only be." The judge looked up sharply. Inside, Monroe said, was a single memory card. "What's on it is currently restricted. But I will tell you this, has already sparked multiple new investigations." The prosecutor stood completely still, and based on what's already been reviewed, Monroe added, "This card may change the way we understand a portion of this entire industry." The silence that followed was different. Not stunned, not shocked, it was haunted. The courtroom no longer felt like a space for answers. It felt like a place where too many people had looked behind the curtain. Monroe straightened the stack of documents in front of him. This wasn't the paranoia of a man spiraling. This was the precision of someone who believed power meant never needing to ask for trust. Someone who engineered silence as a business model. He looked out at the gallery again, victims, press, officials. And then there was the notebook. The prosecutor blinked. A notebook. Monroe nodded grimly. Red ink. Dozens of pages. Every page filled with writing. Rants, lists, psychological diagrams. But one sentence kept repeating. He opened the book, cleared his throat, and read it aloud. "If I control what they fear, I control who they are." The words echoed like a curse 63 times, Monroe added. That one sentence, over and over, like a mantra, like a mission. A ripple of dread passed through the courtroom. At that moment, the image of the charismatic mogul, the untouchable icon, the flashy celebrity shattered. Not just for the jury, not just for the press, but for everyone watching. Diddy hadn't spoken, hadn't denied, hadn't looked up, but the walls he'd built of money, fear, and myth were crumbling, and now all that remained was the truth. The confession and the COLO PC by now. The silence in the courtroom was more than just absence of sound. It had transformed into a presence stick, spectral, like something watching from the shadows. Agent Monroe sat still, his fingers resting lightly on the final document in front of him. The room waited, bracing for whatever came next. "This," he said finally, "was the turning point in our investigation." He held up a folder with a single word printed across the front. Icarus, the name alone drew whispers from the gallery. Even Diddy's attorneys, who had barely reacted until now, looked up from their notes with a flicker of dread in their eyes. This folder, Monroe continued, contained only one item: a video, just under 27 minutes long. No cuts, no edits, no music. Just Mr. Combs, in a room, alone. The prosecutor stepped forward slowly, careful not to break the tension. And what was on that recording? She asked. Monroe didn't blink. A confession. A chill swept the room. The jury froze. The press stopped writing. Even the gavel sat untouched on the judge's bench, as if it too knew this was the moment the illusion would fully die. It begins, Monroe explained, with Mr. Combs pacing in what appears to be a private recording booth. He's sweating. Rambling, he talks to himself at first. Paranoia, frustration. But then he sits, looks straight into the camera. And everything changes. He flipped open his transcript. The first words he says, "You think I didn't plan for this? You think I don't know how this game works? I built the game." Gasps returned, but this time there was no shock. It's just sorrow. He starts naming names. Monroe continued. Executives, artists, influencers. He outlines how he's manipulated them, recorded them, threatened them, how he installed surveillance in his own homes, how he paid hackers to scrub traces. One juror visibly turned pale. Another clutched the armrest like it was the only thing keeping them upright. At one point, Monroe said, voice flattening, he says, "Every time they thought they were winning, I was just flipping the script. You think they became stars? On talent, please. I picked the winners. I buried the ones who got loud." The courtroom was still but not in fear. In mourning a story the public had believed for decades. The self-made icon. The mogul. The king. And then Monroe added, "The part that shook our entire agency was the final minute." He paused. Everyone in the room seemed to lean forward without meaning to. Mr. Combs leans in, looks right at the camera. He smiles and says, "Even if they come for me, they won't believe it. They'll say I was ranting, just blowing off steam. Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm the reason none of them ever speak. Doesn't matter. The vault holds everything, and no one's got the guts to open it." Monroe looked at the judge, at the jury, at Diddy. "Well," he said softly, "we opened it." Number 1 made a sound. Not even the defendant. "And now the world knows," Monroe added. "Not from us, not from rumors, but in his own words, from his own lips. Who he really is." The prosecutor asked the question that lingered over the entire room. Was the video authenticated? Yes, Monroe confirmed. Digital forensics confirmed origin, timestamp, and integrity. It is real, and it is damning. Still, Diddy didn't speak, but his silence no longer felt like strategy. It felt like defeat. Monroe leaned back slightly. His voice dropped again, less official, more personal. "This wasn't just evidence," he said. "This was prophecy." He believed no one would dare uncover the truth, that his power insulated him. And for years, he was right. He closed the folder. But now, we've seen the machine. We've seen the strings. The courtroom sat in stunned paralysis. Still, there was no rebuttal, no spin. Just the cold, suffocating presence of truth. The judge cleared his throat, his voice hoarse from the weight of what had been shared. "This court will recess," but the prosecutor rose. "Your Honor?" She said firmly, "We have no further questions. The evidence has spoken. The vault has spoken. And Mr. Combs has spoken for himself." A long beat of silence followed. Diddy's attorneys did not respond. There was nothing left to say. The courtroom already knew this wasn't a case that could be spun into misunderstanding or media misfire. It was a structure. A blueprint, a crime, not of impulse, but of design. The judge slowly stood. "This court has been presented with overwhelming evidence," he said quietly. And while the fame of the defendant is not on trial, the misuse of power, the willful destruction of others, and the architecture of silence absolutely are. He looked down at Diddy. No amount of legacy or money or myth can shield a person from accountability, not when that legacy is built upon fear. He raised his gavel and brought it down, not with force, but with finality. The sound echoed, not like an end, but like a curtain, closing as Diddy was escorted out of the courtroom. He didn't look up. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He had once ruled award shows, red carpets, record charts. But today, he left as a man stripped to his bones, his empire in ruins. Because the vault, the one place he thought no one would ever touch, had been opened. And once the truth is let out, it never goes back in.